It's Black First, Land First convener Andile Mqitama in front of the Parliament Committee on Finance. And joining us live in studio is Jonas Mahedi, political analyst, or rather activist, and Thandiswa Yap. He's the National Deputy Coordinator for Black First and Land First. And we're also joined by Finance Committee Chairperson Yunus Karim. Good evening to you. We'll start with you, Mr. Karim. First question, has the altercation in Parliament overshadowed the need for a debate on the lack of transformation in the financial sector?
No, not at all. In fact, I don't think one should make too much of the altercation. On the other hand, one shouldn't dismiss it lightly. It's unprecedented. But I think, as unfortunate as the altercation was, I think it's symptomatic, if you like, of the challenged times we're in and the polarized nature of our society. And I think it's important to encourage a robust, open debate. In our own committee, the Finance Committee, and our record speaks for itself, we encourage the public to participate fully, not just in formal public hearings, but also in our committee, we allow the public and its civil society representatives to come and participate in the committee sittings up till the very last moment before we vote on a bill. So let's be clear. We encourage members of the public and civil society structures to criticize us as MPs, to engage robustly with us. This is their parliament after all. It's an organ of people's power. It should be what the Constitution set it out to be and what it in fact was in the first 5 years or more of our democracy. That's not the issue. So as far as the big issues are concerned, on radical economic transformation, in particular the transformation of the financial sector, I think, and the committee does, both committees in fact, that is non-negotiable. It's the terms and the content of it that we have to collectively define through exchanges between the banking sector, the private sector as a whole, trade union movement, civil society structures, government and parliament. And we need to do it swiftly. Now, it's not as if we're saying that the two committees, and remember we have to wait for the report to emerge. We've had like several hundred pages of submissions. And we've just finished over 25 hours of public hearings on the matter. It's a very difficult, challenging time we're in, and the matter is very weighty.
Mr. Karim, Black First, Land First claims you're trying to delegitimize the struggle against white monopoly capital. What is your response?
Firstly, it's their right to say it. But frankly, it's like water off a duck's back if they refer to me as an agent of white monopoly capital. At the age of 16, I became a socialist. I have been a member of the Communist Party since its unbanning. I serve on its Central Committee and Politburo. If you care to know this, I drive around in a 2014 Corolla in Pietermaritzburg, Msunduzi, where I live, and a 2005, 11-year-old is a 12-year-old now Scenic. I give a substantial part of my salary away per month. Well, I used to until recently. Now, in what way could a Marxist want to defend white monopoly capital? The issue I raised with Mr. Mqitama is this, that if we have such a monopolized economy, and it is primarily whites, almost wholly whites who are in charge of it, yes, there's a case to be said that if we are a monopoly, why should it be overwhelmingly white in a country that's overwhelmingly black and in particular African? So yes, we must de-racialize the monopolies. But the question I put to him and to others, and he isn't the first to be subjected to that question, everybody's been asked this, who's relevant in the hearings over the last 3 sittings in this regard. The question put is, isn't it also that we have to demonopolize, that we have to also open up to the lower strata and the lower classes? That's what I asked. It's a fairly legitimate question to ask. Yes, we must de-racialize, but we must also create spaces for the poorer people of our country, African people in particular, to also benefit from economic empowerment. That's not just my view. That's the view of the ANC. That's the view of the government. That's the view of the alliance as a whole.
Now let's go back to the developments yesterday. You seemingly implied to Andile, that he wanted black monopoly capital to replace white monopoly capital. Is that your position on transformation?
That is utterly absurd. The ANC itself, from 1969, its Morogoro conference, made it clear. Oliver Tambo himself repeated it, and so did successive presidents. The aim of the National Democratic Revolution, which is why it's a revolution, is to transfer power from the minority to the majority. It's not to replace one elite by another.
All right, please stay with us. We continue the discussion in studio. Thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thandi Swayapi, National Deputy Coordinator of Black First, Land First, and Jonas Mahedi, political activist. Just your response from what we gathered from the Finance Portfolio Committee Chair. You're essentially saying the same things. I think it's just about ironing out the details. He claims, of course, to also echoing the sentiments of the ANC government about radical economic transformation being urgent and necessary. He even calls it swift, but just saying that you have to find each other in the tonality. What was your impression of what happened yesterday and the response from Mr. Karim?
First of all, let me put the record straight. Not at any point did the president of BLF say that Joanna was fascist, but he merely said that he was subjected to a fascist behavior. And then at that point, they had solved the problem, and the presentations continued. And until the end, when Karim started to say that he was offended by the fact that Andile was talking about the name fascist. But we believe that he only mentioned those things after the presentation because he was defeated.
Yeah, but Dennis, I understand. I mean, there's now a probe that, Parliament will investigate exactly what happened, but the process still needs to continue and, so that the bigger issues are not overshadowed by the altercation per se. So maybe, Jonas, in looking at the radical economic transformation, it is a reality. We've even heard it from Deputy President saying, whoever doesn't believe in it must wake up and smell the roses, in his own words. So it is in how those engagements will take place. Do you feel that, especially with the portfolio committees, if certain radical views or provocative views are shared, there's a sense of resistance? And why is that?
Yeah, look, I think it is necessary to first point out that the whole debate on the transformation of the financial sector is a necessary debate at this point, though it comes a bit late, particularly post-1994 democratic elections. And we should expect from a number of people, to catch emotions at this point. You see, if you listen to Karim, for instance, he says, look, we are in a contaminated political landscape. And we should expect that people would then argue, rather would then be emotional at one point or another. But what I find to be a bit cynical with his question, when he was addressing the question to Andile there in Parliament, when they are arguing about illicit cash flow, he asked whether is it wrong for whites to do that, or in the context of white monopoly capital. And is it correct for others to take the money to Dubai? I mean, the message carried there suggests that Andile's arguments are that illicit cash flow should only flow to Dubai and not to Britain. And I find that to be actually quite incorrect. But what we need to also point out is that the whole transformation question must not be only a matter of deracialization. Because deracialization can also mean replacing white capitalists with black capitalists. And you are not basically resolving the problem. There are many case scenarios. You can speak about the case of Lonmin, where you have got black shareholders in Lonmin. But the brutal attacks and murdering of black mine workers happened even when black shareholders were there. Now, if the banking sector, or rather the financial sector entirely, will be replaced by merely, color of skin, and not the institutionals and the structure itself being changed to suit the interest of the working class and the poor masses of this particular country, I don't think we'll be doing justice to that particular point. So radical economic transformation must not be a buzzword by politicians to basically attempt to reach out to the masses at this point when they realize that masses of the country are becoming impatient. With the promises of 1994, better lives for all. And when people realize they are homeless, they are landless, we then speak of radical economic transformation. What is it? Is it merely deracialization, or is it that you actually transfer the wealth of this particular country into the hands of the overwhelming majority of the people of the country, who are the poor and the working class in particular?
And I think those are the questions that still need to be ventilated. But just going back to yesterday's events, and with Andile Mqithama, the BLF feeling that you were provoked, and Jonas, you share the same sentiment, that had it not been for the condescending remark about, well, if black people, business people trade in Dubai, and by that we know the insinuation is that the Gupta family, and you even see it on social media saying he's a Gupta agent, but all of that takes away from the critical issue of dealing with white monopoly capital, of which now we at least can concede that it does exist based on the wealth, the means of production, the land, and who has more resource than the other race. So it is white people. There's no dispute over that. So for you, how do you take this radicalism forward without being distracted by the sideshows?
For now, as the BLF, we have called the Eland Imbizo, National Land Imbizo, which will be on the 27th of May, where we call all progressive organizations to come so that we can talk about the issue of land expropriation without compensation, and also radical economic transformation. And also, as the BLF, we acknowledge that this is just these attacks are organized by those who are associated with Parliament to divert the attention, and so that RET cannot continue. And also land expropriation, as the President has said, that land expropriation without compensation must be visited. Those clauses in the law must be visited. So I think these fights are only here to divert the attention from what is the real problem, which is white monopoly capital in South Africa.
Yeah. And the radical transformation, we accept that it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to be a process. You might say it started a bit too late in the economic Odessa that we're supposed to have. But the key pillars have been outlined in the sense of, one, the financial sector has got too much a monopoly and very little elbow room for new players. Access to finance, capital, etc. is still very restrained to the white minority. So going forward, just take our audience into your confidence, Jonas, and say, this is going to be a reality. It's going to be a better life for all and the majority black. How can we say that with confidence?
Yeah, look, I think, let me start my point, the points I'm going to make by emphasizing the fact that at this point, the people of the country, or the masses in particular, are becoming impatient, like I've emphasized. It is true that the financial sector needs to be transformed to a point where young people who are working today are able to afford houses. They are able to buy themselves houses, not only VW Golf 7s, as it has become the case with today's modern life, rather. But more than that, it should stretch to also speak about the ownership of the economy being transferred to the overwhelming majority of the people who are basically black in their majority. So one would say that radical economic transformation should basically resolve those issues. One, the issue of access to finance and investment, as it has become really an impediment to the development of small businesses, if you may like, cooperatives, if you may like. We have young people in rural communities, in many working class communities, who could be able to group themselves and actually develop agricultural sector related businesses. But the point at the moment is that you go to a bank today and say you need a loan to basically do a business, any form of business, and the interest rate just becomes ridiculously high. And this has to do also with the fact that the process of deregulation of the financial sector was an organized process, and I think that is what Karim also needs to respond on. Karim kept emphasizing in Parliament that even though we want to transform the financial sector in South Africa, but we must transform it in line with the international financial sector. And the international financial sector in this case argues basically what World Bank and IMF says, that deregularize the financial sector, let it be independent, and continue to advocate for free market policies. So the structural adjustment programs that were imposed on most developing countries around 1985, 87, are continuing to be advocated for even today, even when we want to speak about the so-called radical economic transformation in the context of your Karim.
Yeah, let's get a response from Karim. Jonas, please hold that thought. And Mr. Karim, what is your view on the term white monopoly capital? Do you believe that the financial sector, especially South African bank industries, lack transformation?
Yes, we must fight white monopoly capital. It is utterly absurd, Cindy, that today 4 banks occupy over 90% of the market. 4 auditing firms, the big 4, occupy over 90% of the market. One pay TV provider occupies, when I last saw the figures, 98% of the market. We have to demonopolize. But we don't just deracialize, we demonopolize so that all classes and all strata of the black people benefit. But it must benefit primarily the poor and the disadvantaged. That's my point. Where in that argument, which is the argument of the ANC, let alone the Communist Party from which I come, where in that argument is there a defense of white monopoly capital? How can one defend white monopoly capital in this day and age? It will be foolhardy given the social tensions that are existing out there, apart from any ideological or strategic considerations. That's just a slogan on his side. Mind you, let me also say, there were some concrete proposals that he made on behalf of BFLF, which we will still consider. He, for example, proposed, which I think is reasonable. It's not my call, but I think it's reasonable. He's saying, shouldn't we have a judicial commission of inquiry into bank collusion? That is something our 2 committees need to apply ourselves with. Shouldn't the Johannesburg Stock Exchange transform more? We said that. In fact, there are huge debates, as you know, about the extent to which the JSE is controlled by African people. I even said from the chair, I do not find the statistics given by the JSE compelling. Now, all of those things do not distinguish what he's saying from what our majorities in our 2 committees say.
And part of the BLF's demands was also a need for a black-owned bank in South Africa. Do you support this?
Let me say yet again that it's a collective outcome of collective processes which will lead to our report within the next 6 weeks. But for now, my own view, which I think is shared by the majority in both committees, is that we must fast-track the licensing of the Post Bank. I think the majority in both committees are likely to recommend that we do more to create cooperative banks. I think committees are likely to agree, the majority at least, that we have licensing arrangements that are sensitive on the one hand, when it comes to banks and insurance agencies, to the global requirements, because we participate in the global economy, but at the same time, recognize the specific circumstances of constituencies that have been excluded up till now from owning insurance companies and owning banks. We also think that government needs to consider, and please note my words, we haven't taken any decision, government needs to consider beyond licensing the Post Bank very expeditiously, of a state-owned bank of a different nature as well, beyond what the Post Bank is likely to be. So on those issues about black economic empowerment, particularly broad-based, and also, let me stress, it is very important for the National Democratic Project, and in fact the Socialist Project, that we create an African bourgeois class, an industrialist class. That is the DTI's mandate, 100 industrialists, right? We are also convinced, though, that we cannot focus solely on the creation of a black bourgeois while not at the same time focusing on the empowering people below. The two can be done in a balanced way and in a mutually reinforcing way, so that we find that all classes And all strata of our population benefit from economic growth and development, not just an elite strata. There's nothing in what I've said that particularly new or outlandish. It's part of the ANC's policy position since at least 1969, the Morogoro Conference.
All right, we want to bring it back in studio. Just your reaction to Mr. Karim, essentially again agreeing on the key points that the BLF had pointed out. Maybe just give us an executive summary that you agree, and what will you do going forward to ensure that at least your concerns are not only just collecting dust, but there is progress in this report.
One of the submissions that we have made yesterday is that we want 90% of the companies listed on the JSE to be black owned and to be in the hands of black people. And we call on land expropriation without compensation. We call on nationalization of South African Reserve Bank. And we also call on fully licensed black banks, starting with Itala and the Vendor Developed Society and the Post Bank. We have written so many letters to the president, even also to Malusi Gigaba, to say that he must implement these things going forward. And he mustn't be frightened by the Western countries, because also they are also pushing and putting pressure on him not to do this. And we support his call on RET, and we say he mustn't be afraid, because the nation is behind him and we support all he is doing right now.
Yeah. Jonas, I mean, you're talking about being steadfast and not to waver in the pursuit of radical economic transformation. One could even call it equality, because we can't call South Africa a democracy until we're all free and we can share in the wealth of this land. So the white monopoly capital versus the radical economic transformation, these two can coexist and be mutually beneficial. Do you think we are there yet as a nation where we can debate without necessarily flaring up emotions around these concepts?
Well, coexisting, I don't think it's possible. White monopoly capital cannot coexist in the same space where radical economic transformation is to be undertaken. But I think it's also necessary to point out that globally, the financial sector has been changing. I mean, we must point out that in 2007, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China bought 20% of Standard Bank of Britain. And this goes to show you how actually, you know, the capitalist globalization is taking shape. But I think what we need to point out, and I thought you would have observed the contradiction from the statement by Karim. So he says, Owar Tambo in Morogoro said the ANC cannot promote you know, the black elites, neither can it be promoting white elites. So it is fighting for an egalitarian society. But then in the closure of his recent statement now, he says, we can build the black bourgeois, right? And subsequently, you know, ensure that we transfer, you know, the wealth of the country to the majority of our people. That is quite incorrect of the chairperson of the subcommittee to say, because I have already emphasized that workers died in Marikana, where our black brothers have shareholders. As we speak today, you would hear arguments that our brothers and sisters have got shares in number of mining companies, in number of construction companies, in number of security companies, but that does not necessarily translate into less oppression, less exploitation for the ordinary people of the country.
He did qualify, though, that it has to be broad-based, and I hate to interrupt you. Yeah. So that contradiction, and you know, we will hear the rest of his comments, yes, was necessarily noted, but it was for this particular discussion and not taken from what he may have said in the parliamentary debate. So, Jonas, I'm seriously out of time. We'll have to pick this up another time. Thanks so much to both of you. Thandi Swayapi, National Deputy Coordinator of Black First Land First, and Jonas Mahedi, a political activist, and Eunice Karim is chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance. We take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.